Hello, welcome back to Hunter Tune. Today we are going to be working on an EK Coupe Honda Civic with a single cam. It was here previously actually, but there is, he did some finishing touches on it and brought it back with some recommendations from Hunter Tune. So this car should do pretty good this time around, I'm hoping. I think we had some issues with the turbo, the restrictor, something was clogged up, so the turbo would it'd come into boost and then it would just lock up. And I think that, at least that's what I remember of it. It would come into boost and then it would just kind of stop making boost. So the power level was kind of crappy. He had the cheap Greddy blow-off valve on it, and I think we were having some leaking issues coming from that, so he switched the piping around and switched to the SSQV HKS style blow-off valves. These usually hold a lot better boost. I like to use these. They're like a tile style gate on a lot of these things. So he changed a lot of that stuff around and just kind of did some finishing touches on it. He said there were some issues with the distributor. We changed over to a Speed Factory 4-bar map sensor. And yeah, so what we've done so far is we kind of just got the ignition timing synced up, and I kind of went over the car. It looks really nice. He's done a pretty good job here and getting everything lined out. So hopefully the tuning portion and making horsepower goes just as well as this thing looks. So it's just a little single cam Viterra build with just some basic parts in it. Max Peating rod, connecting rods, Viterra pistons, and then a little bit of valve spring action in the cylinder head, Brian Crower stuff. So we'll see how it goes, and yeah. So we'll see how this thing, if it lives up to its name or not. It does have a full exhaust, so that may hinder it a little bit. I told him if he wants to keep a muffler on it to maybe go with the Vibrant Stealth series mufflers. They're they almost look like a factory muffler, but they are straight through and they don't really hinder performance at all. So that'd be a muffler I would recommend, but full exhaust usually always hinders performance a little bit, but not. He also changed the turbo around and added a 3AN brake line for the oil feed instead of the factory cheap eBay 4AN lines. These lines are a heck of a lot nicer, and they flow the proper amount of oil to these journal bearing turbos. You don't ever want to run them stupid little small restrictors on these eBay turbos because they don't get enough oil at that point. So a 3AN line is always recommended for a journal bearing turbo, and then the restrictor that comes with a ball bearing turbo, like what's offered on my website, is what you should run on a ball bearing. But don't run a restrictor on a journal bearing turbo. It's just not, usually doesn't work out too well, and especially they get clogged up pretty easily. So turbos just don't work as good. I think we also had some wastegate issues with this car last time it came in, and he switched over to Speed Daddy 38mm wastegate. I'm really thinking that this car should come together today, and we will find out here shortly. We're actually got it strapped down on the dyno. I'm gonna get the dyno synced up here, and then we will start doing some tugs. Alright guys, so first pull, I got all the ignition yanked out of it. It's really rich, and we definitely got some cleanup to do here. So we can definitely see that there's a dip, kind of comes in and then falls off. So I don't know what's going on there with, maybe it's just getting really rich there. I got to go through the logs and kind of see what's going on with the tune. But 160 for horsepower on the first run. I really didn't even touch it from the base map that was on here, or from the tuning that was on here the last time. So yeah, we're gonna go from here, and it's on 7 pounds of boost. So little single cam, we'll see if we can get some more power out of it. So we're in the car. We actually just did another run with this thing, and seems to be a little bit better. I pulled out like almost 15% of fuel on it. We're right around a 12.0 air fuel now. Being on E85 should be pretty much where this thing wants to be on low boost. Only being on 7 pounds or so, I'd like to run it a little bit leaner, just to kind of get this thing lit up a little quicker. So we're gonna see what the power curve looks like, what that fueling change did to it. If it doesn't really help a ton, we're gonna move over to that ignition map that I got going on here, because we're currently only running about 19 degrees at 7 pounds, so it's probably gonna want a little bit more than that. And the current VTEC set points are on 4,500. So we're gonna leave off at that, kind of see what it did. Everything else seems to be running good. The wideband does seem a little funky still. I know we had issues with his wideband the last time, but it is registering richer air fuel now, where before he had a sensor in it that would only register from like 13 to 15. Like, it wasn't going any richer than 12.5 no matter how much fuel I put in it, and it wasn't going any leaner than 14.7. It was like a cheap knockoff eBay O2 sensor. So we're gonna kind of see what that did to the curve. Like I said, I just kind of pulled a little bit of fuel out of it. Let's see here. So it didn't really change a whole ton right now. Let me turn VTEC off and see if we have good activation on it right now. I don't know why it's got such a lull in the power curve. Alright guys, so I just did a pull without VTEC on, and this thing literally fell over at like 4,000 RPM. So it does seem like it's off a tooth on the timing. I just lowered VTEC down to 4,000, and I guarantee we're gonna make more power just because the timing is too far advanced right now, I think. Or too far retarded, we don't exactly know yet, but I think it might be off a tooth just by the way it's acting on the tune. Because it's really not making as much power as it should. Or at least what I think it should be making. I think it should be making a little bit more than it is. 160 horsepower on 7 pounds kind of seems a little low. But it's holding boost, so that's good. One step at a time, right? Alright, so we've actually been working on this car for quite a while now, just kind of tinkering, trying to figure out why it's just down on horsepower, and I think one of two things is going on. I figured it would be a cam timing issue or ignition timing issue, because it just didn't seem like it was happy, and the power curve was just kind of doing a little wave. It kind of come in and out of power. So I'm like, okay, something's going on. We pulled the the timing belt off of it, and we actually tried a tooth forward and a tooth back. And the reason we did that is because this is a full Y8. Came with this car. Like, it shouldn't be like some crazy mini-me swap or anything like that, but I always seem to have issues with timing on single cams for some reason, especially when you take like a Y7 bottom end and put a Z6 head on it and use the Y8 cam gear, and it just kind of screws everything up, ignition timing wise and cam timing wise. So I figured, let's try it advanced 1 degree. And let's try it retarded 1 degree and see kind of what makes a difference. We went advanced, car started up better, revved better, everything like that. But the distributor is already maxed out to the point where we can't go any farther. This is where it is, you know, on the marks. This lines up the marks perfectly fine, and the distributor is maxed all the way one way to line up the ignition timing. So if we go, that's why I was like, well, maybe we'll try to go one retarded and have the distributor line up kind of where it's supposed to be. But this is an aftermarket distributor. It's from O'Reilly's or AutoZone. It's not Honda OEM, which sometimes the rotors are keyed ever so slightly different and stuff like that. So it's going to kind of throw this off a little bit. I only had 18 degrees of ignition in it, the ignition timing. And I was kind of scared to run a little bit more than that, just because it's a single cam. They don't like a lot of ignition, and usually they don't respond that good, but I think this thing's really far retarded for some reason. Like I said, I have that all the way maxed out to line up the timing marks on here. So what I'm seeing at the computer should match theoretically at the engine. But if something's still a little funny, I don't know. So what we did this last time is I just said, screw it. I'm putting 2.5 degrees in it, and we're gonna see kind of what it does. And you guys can see here, well, we actually try to pull with it 1 tooth advanced and 1 tooth retarded, and we actually lost horsepower. But this is where we were before. This is where we tried to move the cam gear around without changing ignition timing, and it lost a bunch of power, so we're like, okay, screw that. And this is where we're at now, 186. This is kind of where the car should be on this type of boost. And I was telling Bryce here, the owner of the car, earlier that turbos are pretty much just building another atmosphere. So it's like if you take the atmosphere you're in right now and add another atmosphere, that's kind of how you can do your math. So if your car, say, makes 120 horsepower or 130 horsepower naturally aspirated, if you put 7 pounds of boost on it, that's half of an atmosphere. So that's half of what your power would be. So if it makes 120 horsepower for simple math, that would mean we would gain 60 horsepower on 7 pounds of boost. And that's kind of right where we're at right now. So I would think this car would make 125, 130 all motor. Now it's making 186. So I think we're finally lining this thing out and kind of figuring out where it's going to want to be. And I'm going to try another degree of timing and kind of see what it does to the curve. But just comparing the two, just ignition timing change, you can see that it picked up everywhere in vtec. So it didn't really respond as well down here to ignition timing. It did still respond nonetheless, but it did respond much better in vtec. So the higher the RPM, the more ignition timing you're typically going to want to run. So we're, you know, say above 4,500, right when vtec kicks in, we're like, bah, making way more. So we're going to try to add another degree or two, and I bet you this dip right here is going to flatten out, and it's just going to kind of smoothen that right out, I'm hoping. So we're going to try that out and see where it goes. But we're going to try to line all this stuff out before we add any more boost, because then we're prepared going into adding power instead of, you know, I would rather try to get the tune lined out on lower boost and make sure the ignition timing is where it's got to be and everything like that before you go add a ton of boost to it. Okay, so, and another thing that you can always note is if you put ignition timing in a car and it drops boost, which this thing lost about a half a pound of boost and picked up 25 horsepower from adding 2 degrees. So that's another indicator that the engine's just a little happier overall. So we're going to try a little bit more ignition here, kind of see where it ends up. This is always my weakness. I always start off way too conservative on ignition timing. Okay, so we didn't really drop any boost that time, so I don't know how much power it really would have picked up that run, but I wanted to try another 2 degrees to see what it did to the power curve. So now we're going to walk out there and kind of see what it did. I'm really hoping that it kind of gets rid of that little lull in power that's going on there. Air fuel's pretty consistent, right around 12.0, 12.2, 189. See, like, we added 2 more degrees, only picked up 3 horsepower. So we're kind of at that limit. Like I said, this might be the happy spot where this thing wants to be. So if we compare just these two, the green and red are where we're at now. So we did pick up more power. And I bet you if we just added a little boost to this, it would kind of just level all this out again even more. But 190 on 7 pounds of boost is not too bad, and that's kind of where this thing should be. So let's see if we can get a boost controller on this thing and try to crank it up a little bit more. All right, guys, so we just actually put a manual boost controller on this thing because he came with no boost controller, so I actually had a manual bleed valve sitting here that I'm hoping will work on this thing. We just plumbed it in, got the spring just set so it's not rattling. So maybe it'll pick up like a pound or two, and we can just go up a little bit at a time. Some of these manual boost controllers can get a little sketchy. You know, one little half a turn could be 10 pounds of boost, so we got to take it easy. I have the boost cut set. I have the cut set at 18, so if it goes over 18, it will cut the engine off. So. Imagine if that would have carried out. Yeah. So we ran a little bit too much boost there. I'm gonna turn the controller down a little bit and baby steps, baby steps. Dude, it's super sensitive, like a fucking quarter turn is fine. That's why it came up to like 16. I'm like, ugh, get off. That 195, we're almost at 200 now, so we'll keep going. It probably would have made 200 had I stayed in a little longer. I want to get the boost kind of at the half spot. So we actually just did some more, we got some boost out of it this time. This controller is really sensitive, so like quarter turn is like 4 or 5 pounds of boost. So I'm going like an eighth a turn at a time. The second run we just did there was 9 pounds instead of 7, and that one was 11 and a half. So the tune is a lot richer up in those areas, so I'm pulling fuel out of those, and I gave it another like 1/16 of a turn. And we're gonna see if we can, I'd like to see 15 pounds of boost and just good fueling, and I think this thing will make like mid 200s, and I think he'll be super happy with that. So that's kind of our goal. I think that's where I want to land with this thing today. So I pulled some fuel out of the tune above 10 pounds of boost where it was getting fat before. All right, guys, we ended up making some good horsepower with this thing. We ended up having some ignition timing and cam timing issues of what we thought of was going on here, but now that I'm looking at the power curve and it's kind of painting the same plot every time, there's like a lull in the fucking curve where it'll come up, make good power, and then it just, oh, it'll come up and then it'll just kind of it'll just go flat for a second, and then it kind of starts improving after that. But it has that like flat spot in the power curve, which I think is just going to be the byproduct of having an airflow restriction, whether it's in the intake or if it's in the exhaust. If you guys can see this intercooler, I don't know how big this thing is, but I mean, it's probably like a two inch core, 2 inch wide, 2 1/4 inch wide, maybe 2 inch inlet, and I mean, it's probably, I don't know, 4 inches tall. It's pretty small. This is kind of a smaller intercooler, which I think may be hindering performance. If I had an intercooler here, I would really like to do a back-to-back test to see if you know, a different intercooler would kind of change the way that the power curve looks and maybe give it a little bit of horsepower. Another thing to consider is the exhaust size on this car is closer to 2 inch, 2 1/4 out by the muffler here where it goes over the axle. That's another hindrance on why, you know, it may just need to breathe a little bit better. But in, you know, all these little kind of quirks with this car, we did have a good outcome today and ended up making 249 horsepower as a peak. And that's on 15 pounds of boost. So this little single cam is doing pretty good with this eBay kit. I think there's some room for improvement. You guys can see here that there was some improvement down on the low end. I lowered VTEC down and picked up some pretty good chunk right there, so it should feel a little bit better. And yeah, so maybe he'll do some improvements. We'll bring it back and maybe kind of see what the exhaust is going to do with this thing, or what the intercooler could do. I think that would be some good testing to maybe let you guys know on some of the cheaper eBay intercoolers. I really think it's kind of that intercooler, now that I'm thinking about it a little more, but we'll see. Anyways, have a great night and a better tomorrow. We'll see you later.